4 days to save a ghost. Colonel Richard Hayes sat in his office staring at the notification on his computer screen, the words seeming to mock him with their bureaucratic normalcy. General William Ashford's inspection tour. Scheduled arrival Fort Bragg, Tuesday 0900 hours. The same man who'd ordered 15 civilian deaths. The same man who'd tried to murder the witness who testified against him. The same man who was about to walk onto Hayes's base while the woman he'd tried to kill scrubbed toilets in Building 7. Welcome back to Hidden Valor Stories. This is part 2 of Maya Rodriguez's story. If you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch it now. This won't make sense without it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Hayes had built 30 years of military career on following regulations and proper procedures. Never cut corners. Never bypassed chain of command. Never bent rules even when convenient. His reputation was built on doing things the right way. Always. Now he was going to throw all of that away. Because the right way had failed. Maya Rodriguez 12 years ago, and following the right way now meant she'd be dead by Wednesday. Day 1 began with a phone call to someone Hayes hadn't spoken to in 7 years. Marcus Webb, former Special Forces operator who'd left service after too many classified missions that violated too many international laws. Webb now ran what he called a veteran support network out of Baltimore's storefront. What he actually ran was underground railroad for veterans burned by the system. People running from VA bureaucratic failures, hiding from chain of command retaliation, people who'd seen things they weren't supposed to see and told truths they weren't supposed to tell. Hayes had met Webb in Iraq back in 2007. They'd worked together on joint operation that went badly wrong, ending with civilian casualties and cover-up Webb refused to participate in. Webb had been quietly forced out with medical discharge that erased his most classified operations from his service record. The call was brief and coded. Hayes explained in broad strokes without using names. Soldier witnessed war crimes, testified, declared killed in action to silence her. Hiding 12 years under false identities. Officer who tried to kill her, now a general, scheduled to visit Hayes's base in 4 days. Webb was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim. He asked if Hayes was talking about Ashford. Hayes felt chill run down spine, asking how Webb knew. Webb explained Hayes wasn't the first person to call him about Ashford. The general had been doing this for years. Kandahar 2013 wasn't his first cover-up, just the first time a witness survived long enough to run. Webb had been documenting cases for a decade. Every time a veteran came to his network running from the system, he asked questions, collected evidence, built files. Ashford's file was one of his thickest. Fallujah 2006, Mosul 2008, Helmand 2010, Kandahar. Pattern of civilian casualties that Ashford falsified in reports, blamed on enemy action, covered up. Anyone who tried to report it got silenced, transferred to shit assignments, drummed out on bogus charges, or killed in convenient combat actions that eliminated the witness. Webb could document 14 witnesses who either died, disappeared, or were professionally destroyed. He suspected probably twice that many. Ashford had been good at what he did, climbed ranks by being aggressive, taking risks, making sure nobody survived to contradict his version of events. Webb said he could come to North Carolina with his files. But Hayes needed to understand what he was walking into. Ashford had protectors, people in Pentagon who'd built careers on his success, politicians who used his aggressive tactics as proof of winning the war on terror. Going after Ashford meant going after everyone invested in keeping him clean. Hayes understood the stakes. Webb warned that this wasn't like combat where you knew who the enemy was. In this fight the enemy looked like friends. Wore same uniform, saluted same flag, and they'd destroy you with paperwork and bureaucracy instead of bullets. Webb arrived next morning driving beat-up Ford pickup that looked like it belonged to contractor. 58 now, gray-bearded and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. He carried battered backpack Hayes suspected contained evidence files that could destroy multiple careers. They met in Hayes's on-base quarters rather than his office. No official record of meeting, no security cameras, no chance someone might overhear. Webb spread files across dining room table, photographs, witness statements, after-action reports that didn't match official records, medical examiner reports that had been suppressed. This was just Ashford's file. Webb had others, dozens of them. Officers who'd committed war crimes, covered them up, continued their careers while witnesses disappeared. Hayes studied documents, anger growing with each page. Fallujah 2006. Ashford ordered artillery strike on suspected insurgent position, actually hit mosque during Friday prayers. 37 civilians dead, blamed on insurgents using human shields. Witness transferred to combat outpost that got overrun 2 months later. Lieutenant killed in action. Case closed. Mosul 2008. Ashford's unit conducted night raid on false intelligence. Killed family of 6. Classified bodies as enemy combatants. Witness filed IG complaint. Specialist discharged 6 months later on psychological grounds after 3 suicide attempts. Last known location, homeless shelter in Detroit. Hellman 2010. Ashford approved airstrike on compound. Pre-strike reconnaissance suggested civilians present, but Ashford overruled concern. 8 dead, including 4 children. Classified as enemy casualties. Air Force captain who recommended against strike, had career stalled, denied promotions, eventually resigned commission. Current location unknown. Kandahar 2013. Rodriguez's case. 15 civilians dead, witness survived assassination attempt and disappeared. The pattern was clear and sickening. Ashford built reputation on aggressive tactics and high enemy body counts. When those tactics killed civilians, he falsified reports and eliminated anyone who contradicted his version. And somehow he'd gotten away with it for nearly 2 decades. Webb pushed folder across table. Hayes now had the evidence. Question was what he'd do with it. Hayes read through everything, understanding the systematic nature of Ashford's crimes. The general had built his career on operations where half the enemy casualties had actually been civilians. Women, children, elders, people who happened to be in wrong place when Ashford decided he needed combat success to boost promotion prospects. Anyone who tried to report it disappeared, some actually died. Some were discharged on psychological grounds, some simply vanished from official records. Webb explained this was enough to court-martial Ashford if they could get it admitted as evidence, but Ashford had been preparing for this moment for 12 years. He was insulated, protected. Every piece of evidence could be challenged, dismissed as hearsay, or classified to prevent its use in court. Webb suggested they not play by Ashford's rules, not go through official channels, make it public. Make it so big that even his protectors couldn't cover it up. That evening brought the crucial planning session. Hayes, Webb, and Rodriguez met in Hayes's quarters after her cleaning shift ended. First time Hayes had seen her out of janitorial uniform. Jeans and simple sweater, hair down instead of pulled back in bun. She looked younger, more like the combat medic Hayes remembered, but with weariness and eyes that hadn't been there before. Webb spread his documentation across table. Rodriguez added her own evidence, photographs she'd taken in Kandahar before fleeing, witness statements from other soldiers who'd been part of the mission, medical records of civilians she'd treated before they died. She'd been carrying this evidence for 12 years, moving it with her every time she changed identities, never willing to destroy it because it was only proof those 15 people had existed and died unjustly. The evidence was extensive but had critical weakness. All unofficial. Photographs that couldn't be authenticated. Witness statements from soldiers who couldn't be located or who'd recant under pressure. Medical records not in any official database. Webb said they needed something Ashford couldn't deny. Something that forced official investigation he couldn't suppress. Rodriguez had been quiet through most of discussion, studying files with clinical detachment. Hayes recognized from her medical work, she was compartmentalizing, processing information without letting emotion cloud judgment. Finally, she looked up and spoke. There was one piece of evidence Ashford didn't know existed. Something that couldn't be denied or suppressed because it was already in official systems, just not connected to his case. DNA evidence. From Kandahar site. She'd collected tissue samples from victims before site was destroyed. Standard combat medic procedure for mass casualty events, document everything in case there were questions later about cause of death or identification. She'd sent those samples to Armed Forces Medical Examiner System before fleeing. They were in database under her name and service number. Database still thought she was dead, so nobody ever looked at them or connected them to Kandahar. Webb leaned forward with realization. She'd sent forensic evidence of 15 civilian deaths to official military database. Rodriguez confirmed. With photographs, coordinates, timestamps, everything needed to prove those people died where and when, she said. Only problem was accessing database required authentication she didn't have anymore. Hayes felt something click into place. But he did. Medical examiner records could be requested by commanding officers conducting official investigations. Webb pointed out Hayes didn't have official investigation. Hayes explained his plan. He would open official inquiry into irregularities in after-action reporting from 2013 Kandahar operations. Vague, bureaucratic, the kind of administrative review that happened all the time when preparing for promotion boards or updating historical records. Nothing that would alert Ashford, but enough to give Hayes legal authorization to request medical examiner files. Once he had files, he'd have official proof. 15 civilians died. Proof including DNA evidence, photographs, documentation from combat medic whose testimony was in system even if she was officially dead. That evidence would force investigation even Ashford's protectors couldn't suppress. Rodriguez pointed out it had to happen before Tuesday, before Ashford arrived. Because moment he saw her, even if he didn't recognize her immediately, his people would start digging, and Maria Ruiz's background wouldn't stand up to serious scrutiny. Hayes outlined two-track approach. He'd handle official investigation and evidence gathering. Webb would work on finding other witnesses and getting them somewhere safe where they could testify if needed. Rodriguez would stay invisible, not change routine, not do anything that might alert surveillance. They worked through the weekend. Hayes filed administrative inquiry first thing Monday morning, buried in stack of other routine paperwork. By Monday afternoon, he had authorization to request medical examiner files related to 2013 Kandahar operations. Files arrived Tuesday morning, 6 hours before Ashford's scheduled arrival. Hayes opened them in his office with Webb and Rodriguez present. What they found was even more damning than hoped. Forensic reports confirmed all 15 victims were civilians. No weapons residue, no military-age males, no indicators of combatant status. DNA evidence matched family members who'd filed missing person reports with Afghan authorities. Photographs showed children, women, elderly men, and all of it was tagged with Rodriguez's name and service number as documenting medic. Webb confirmed this was enough. Would force formal investigation. But Rodriguez pointed out timing problem. Ashford arrived in 4 hours. Even if Hayes filed this evidence now, it would take days or weeks to process through proper channels. By then Ashford would have seen her, figured out she was alive, and she'd disappear for real this time. Hayes had been thinking about this problem since Friday. The solution wasn't proper channels, had to make it public, make it so big that even Ashford's protectors couldn't cover it up. Webb asked how. Hayes explained Ashford wasn't just here for inspection, he was being considered for 3rd Star in command of Special Operations Command. This inspection was essentially final evaluation before promotion board convened. That board included Secretary of Defense, Chairman of Joint Chiefs, 3 senators from Armed Services Committee. All would be here today for ceremony. Rodriguez's eyes widened with understanding. Hayes wanted to present evidence of war crimes in front of Secretary of Defense. Hayes confirmed. Make Ashford's crimes so public, so undeniable, that protectors had no choice but to throw him under bus to protect themselves. If done quietly through channels, Ashford had time to bury it again. If done in front of nation's military leadership, they'd have to act or be complicit. Webb grinned, despite gravity of situation. Bold. Probably career suicide for Hayes, but he liked it. Hayes acknowledged his career was worth less than those 15 lives. Worth less than making sure Rodriguez could stop running. They had 3 hours to prepare. Hayes would give routine briefing during ceremony about Fort Bragg facilities and readiness. Normally 10 minutes of boring statistics. Today would be something very different. Webb would be an audience with documentation, ready to provide corroborating evidence if challenged. Rodriguez would be there too, not as Maria Ruiz, the janitor, but as Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, officially dead for 12 years, ready to testify about what she'd witnessed. The ceremony began at 1400 hours in Main Conference Hall. Room filled with senior officers, local politicians, promotion board members who'd flown in from Washington. General Ashford stood on stage looking confident and decorated, chest heavy with ribbons and medals earned through operations that had killed civilians and buried witnesses. Hayes sat in wings briefing slides loaded on laptop. Current slides showed facilities, statistics, and maintenance schedules. But he'd prepared second set, hidden in separate file, ready to replace official presentation when his turn came. He watched Ashford give speech about warrior ethos, about aggressive leadership, about importance of decisive action in combat. Irony was sickening. This man praising warriors while having ordered deaths of innocents and murder of witnesses. Then came Hayes's turn. He walked a podium carrying laptop, feeling weight of what he was about to do. This would end his career. Might result in criminal charges for releasing classified information. Might get him killed if Ashford's network was as extensive as Webb believed. But Rodriguez had spent 12 years dead so civilians could have justice. Least Hayes could do was risk his career to make sure she hadn't sacrificed in vain. He opened laptop, switched to hidden presentation file, and began speaking. His words cut through the ceremonial atmosphere like gunfire. He addressed Secretary Morrison, Chairman Peters, honored senators, general officers, said he was scheduled to brief on facilities management. Instead, he was going to brief on systematic war crimes covered up for nearly 2 decades. The room erupted. Officers jumped to feet. Ashford's face went white, then red with rage. Secretary of Defense shouted for order. But Hayes kept talking, his voice steady and clear, projecting command presence developed over 30 years of service. September 2013, then Colonel William Ashford ordered strike on compound in Kandahar province. Intelligence claimed enemy command post. Actually civilian shelter. 15 people died, all non-combatants, all innocent. He clicked to next slide. Photographs appeared on the massive screen. Children, women, elderly men, bodies in rubble of destroyed compound. The audience went silent, shocked by the graphic images that transformed abstract discussion into visceral reality. The combat medic who documented these deaths filed report through proper channels. 1 month later, she was declared killed in action. Except she wasn't killed. She survived assassination attempt and has been living under false identities for 12 years. Ashford was on his feet now, face contorted with rage and fear. He shouted that this was fabrication, lies, that the medic died in combat and Hayes was spreading conspiracy theories designed to destroy a decorated officer's career. His words were cut off by a voice from the back of the room. 3 words that changed everything. Still alive. Every head in the conference hall turned. Maya Rodriguez stood at the rear entrance wearing her dress uniform, the one she'd kept hidden and preserved for 12 years in hope of this moment. Her service ribbons included the Silver Star and Purple Heart, gleaming under the overhead lights. Her name tag read Rodriguez in clear, unmistakable letters. The room went silent with the kind of absolute shock that comes when the impossible becomes real. Rodriguez walked down the center aisle, her steps measured and certain, her military bearing perfect despite 12 years away from service. She came to attention in front of the stage and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, service number 2084-76651, officially declared killed in action October 15, actually survived assassination attempt ordered by then Colonel William Ashford to prevent my testimony about war crimes he committed. Secretary of Defense Morrison found his voice, though it carried disbelief and confusion. This was impossible, he stammered. They'd sent her remains to her family. There had been a funeral. Her name was on memorial walls. Rodriguez's response was calm and factual, delivered with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her mind for over a decade. They sent someone's remains, sir, not mine. I was alive, in hiding, because the alternative was being murdered to protect a war criminal who wore the same uniform I'd sworn to honor. Ashford was screaming now, his words incoherent with rage and fear, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Military police moved toward the stage as he lunged forward, reaching as if he could physically stop what was happening. The ceremony descended into controlled chaos, officers shouting, reporters frantically taking notes and photographs, the promotion board members conferring urgently among themselves. Hayes calmly clicked through the rest of his presentation while MPs restrained Ashford. Forensic evidence from the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System appeared on screen, DNA reports confirming civilian deaths, tissue sample analysis, photographic documentation, witness statements from soldiers who'd been ordered to falsify reports, their faces blurred but their testimony damning. A pattern of cover-ups spanning 15 years, each one represented by a slide showing casualties, falsified reports and silenced witnesses. And through it all, Maya Rodriguez stood at attention, living proof that the witness Ashford had tried to silence had survived, had preserved evidence, had waited 12 years for this moment of justice. Secretary of Defense Morrison finally restored order by standing and speaking with an authority that cut through the chaos. He ordered the immediate detention of General William Ashford pending investigation. Military police escorted Ashford from the room while he continued screaming about conspiracies and betrayal and the people who would pay for this humiliation. The ceremony was over. What came next would be investigations, hearings, courts-martial. But the evidence was now public, documented in official records, witnessed by the nation's military leadership. Even Ashford's protectors couldn't bury it this time. Hayes was immediately placed under arrest by military police for releasing classified information and violating security protocols. He'd expected it, had prepared for it, accepted it as the price of justice. As they led him from the room, he caught Rodriguez's eye across the crowded hall. She nodded once, acknowledgement, gratitude, respect between warriors who'd both paid prices for doing what was right. The investigation that followed took 8 months and shook the military establishment to its foundations. Hayes spent most of that time under house arrest, facing potential court-martial for his unauthorized release of classified information. The charges were serious: violation of security protocols, bypassing chain of command, releasing sensitive material to unauthorized personnel. But as the investigation progressed, as forensic experts confirmed the evidence, as other witnesses came forward emboldened by Rodriguez's courage, as the pattern of Ashford's crimes became undeniable, the narrative began to shift. What Hayes had done was technically illegal, but it had exposed systematic corruption that the military couldn't ignore without destroying its own credibility and moral authority. The charges against Hayes were quietly dropped 6 months into the investigation, replaced with an official reprimand that would remain in his file but wouldn't result in court-martial. It was the military's way of acknowledging that while his methods had been wrong, his cause had been just. General William Ashford's court-martial lasted 3 months and became the most closely watched military trial in a generation. He was convicted on 17 counts, including murder, conspiracy to commit murder, falsifying official documents, obstruction of justice, and ordering the assassination of a military witness. The evidence was overwhelming: DNA reports, photographic documentation, witness testimony from soldiers across multiple operations, forensic analysis that couldn't be disputed or explained away. He was sentenced to 30 years in military prison with no possibility of parole. His rank was stripped, his pension revoked, his name removed from buildings and programs that had honored his service. Every award and commendation he'd received was reviewed, and those connected to operations involving civilian casualties were rescinded. His conviction opened floodgates throughout the military. Other victims came forward: soldiers who'd witnessed war crimes and been silenced, families of witnesses who'd died suspiciously, officers who'd been forced out for reporting what they'd seen. Other cases were reopened, other investigations launched, other officers who'd participated in cover-ups were investigated, and in some cases charged. The military justice system, so often criticized for protecting its own, worked as intended for once. The message was clear: no rank would protect war criminals, no position would shield those who murdered civilians and silenced witnesses. Maya Rodriguez was officially returned to life through a bureaucratic process that took months to complete. Her death certificate was voided. Her service record was restored with full documentation of what had actually happened: her heroism under fire, her truthful testimony, the assassination attempt she'd survived, the 12 years she'd spent in hiding while the military failed to protect her. The Marine Corps issued a formal apology for the error and for failing to protect her when she'd reported war crimes through proper channels. The apology was read by the commandant himself at a ceremony Rodriguez didn't attend. She'd had enough of ceremonies and official acknowledgments. What she wanted was her life back. She was offered reinstatement with back pay and promotion to the rank she would have achieved based on her time in service. The offer came with assignment to training command at Quantico, where she could help develop new protocols for witness protection and war crimes reporting. She would have a voice in reforming the system that had failed her. Rodriguez declined the reinstatement. 12 years of being dead was enough. 12 years of looking over her shoulder, changing identities, living in fear that every footstep behind her might be an assassin. She accepted an honorable discharge with full benefits and took a position as counselor at a veterans support center in Baltimore, Marcus Webb's organization. Her work there focused on helping other veterans navigate the system and find support when the military failed them. She specialized in working with witnesses to war crimes, helping them understand their rights, connecting them with resources to stay safe while truth-telling, providing the kind of protection she'd never received until Colonel Hayes walked into that bathroom. Colonel Richard Hayes faced his own reckoning over those 8 months. The official reprimand for unauthorized release of classified information remained permanently in his record. Questions about his methods and his decision to bypass the chain of command followed him through the final months of his career. Concerns were raised in fitness reports about whether he could be trusted with sensitive information in future assignments. But he was also quietly commended by people who understood what he'd done and why. Secretary of Defense Morrison personally thanked him in a private meeting for his courage in exposing systematic corruption, acknowledging that while the methods had been irregular, the result had been necessary. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs mentioned in a carefully informal conversation that the military needed more officers willing to put justice above career advancement. Several senators wrote letters of commendation that couldn't be officially filed, but acknowledged his service to truth and accountability. These letters would never appear in his official record, but they represented recognition from people who understood that sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the rules designed to prevent justice. Hayes retired 6 months after Ashford's trial concluded, leaving the Army after 31 years of service. He hadn't planned to retire so soon, had hoped to serve a few more years, maybe make general himself, continue the career he'd built on integrity and leadership. But the cost of exposing Ashford had been his future in the military, and he accepted that cost without regret or complaint. His retirement ceremony was small by design, attended by people who mattered rather than people who were required to attend. Maya Rodriguez was there wearing civilian clothes but standing with military bearing that 12 years of hiding hadn't erased. Marcus Webb came down from Baltimore with several veterans from his network. Sarah Chen flew in from the Pentagon. The audience was small but significant, people who understood that sometimes doing the right thing meant ending your career, and that such sacrifice deserved recognition even if it couldn't be officially acknowledged. The day after his retirement ceremony, Hayes drove to Baltimore to visit Webb's Veterans Center. It occupied a converted warehouse in a rough neighborhood where the official military didn't look too closely. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs of veterans the network had helped, people running from system failures, hiding from retaliation, seeking justice that official channels had denied them. Hayes found Rodriguez there, working with a young Marine who'd been discharged for PTSD and was struggling to adjust to civilian life. She was teaching him breathing techniques for managing anxiety attacks, explaining how to navigate VA bureaucracy, helping him understand that his service mattered even if the military hadn't properly prepared him for transition home. Her voice was patient, her manner confident, her bearing that of someone who'd found purpose after years of merely surviving. They talked in Webb's cluttered office, surrounded by filing cabinets full of evidence about veterans the system had failed. Rodriguez explained she'd been working there for 3 months, ever since her discharge was finalized. The work was hard, listening to stories of betrayal, abandonment, institutional failure day after day. But it was also meaningful in ways her military service had never been. She was helping people who had nowhere else to turn, providing support she'd desperately needed and never received during her 12 years of running. Hayes asked how she was adjusting to being alive again, to being Maya Rodriguez instead of Maria Ruiz. Rodriguez smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Hayes had seen from her since that day in Helmand Province when she'd saved his life. She could use her real name now, could call her family without fear of putting them in danger. Could visit her mother who'd thought her daughter was dead for 12 years, could reconnect with friends who'd mourned her, could stop looking over her shoulder every time she heard footsteps behind her. That was enough, more than enough. Hayes pulled out a photograph he'd been carrying since the previous week. It showed a memorial wall at Arlington National Cemetery. 15 names had been added to it, the civilian victims from Kandahar, whose deaths had been erased from official records for over a decade. Their deaths were officially acknowledged now, their names permanently recorded. Next to each name was a small notation, innocent victim of war crimes, September 5th. They're not forgotten, Hayes said quietly, placing the photograph on the desk where Rodriguez could see it. Rodriguez touched the photograph gently, her fingers tracing the names she'd memorized 12 years ago. Names that had haunted her nightmares. Names she'd carried in her evidence files through a dozen different identities. Names that had driven her to testify despite knowing the costs. Amina, age 9. Rashid, age 6. Fatima, age 63. All of them remembered now, their deaths acknowledged, their existence validated. No, she agreed softly. They're not forgotten anymore. Webb knocked on the door and entered carrying 3 cups of coffee. He had news from the Pentagon. 3 more officers connected to Ashford's network had been charged with crimes ranging from falsifying reports to witness intimidation. The investigation was expanding beyond Ashford himself to examine the entire culture of civilian casualty reporting and witness protection. They were calling it the largest corruption investigation in modern military history. Good, Rodriguez said simply. The word carried 12 years of waiting, 12 years of hoping that someday justice would extend beyond just Ashford to the system that had enabled him. Webb continued with more news. The Veterans Network had received 47 new cases in the past month. Veterans who'd seen what happened with Ashford's trial and finally believed someone might listen to their stories. People who'd been hiding or silent for years, convinced that telling the truth would only destroy them. They were coming forward now, asking for help, seeking justice. The network was overwhelmed, trying to process all the cases. Hayes looked at Rodriguez, then at Webb, then at the filing cabinets full of cases waiting for someone to care enough to investigate. He'd retired from the military but not from service. He had time now. Experience that couldn't be replicated, connections throughout the military establishment, understanding of how the system worked and where its failures occurred. Most importantly, he had the credibility of someone who'd sacrificed his career for justice. That meant something to veterans who'd been betrayed by the institution they'd served. He told them he was serious about helping. Rodriguez had spent 12 years running because no one with authority would protect her. How many others were out there doing the same thing? How many witnesses were hiding because they feared retaliation? How many people with evidence of crimes were staying silent because they didn't believe anyone would listen? Someone needed to help them, and Hayes was done sitting on the sidelines watching injustice continue. Rodriguez stood and extended her hand with a smile that carried both welcome and warning. Welcome to the fight that never ends. Hayes shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the same strength that had pulled him from a burning vehicle in Helmand Province, the same strength that had survived assassination and 12 years in hiding, the same strength that had stood before the Secretary of Defense and refused to stay silent. One moment longer. Just Hayes now, he said. Not Colonel anymore. We're equals in this. Then welcome to the fight, Hayes. Let's get to work. The 3 of them spent the rest of that afternoon and into the evening reviewing cases, planning investigations, building strategies to protect witnesses and expose crimes the military wanted to bury. It wasn't the career Hayes had planned when he'd entered West Point 3 decades ago. It wasn't the life Rodriguez had expected when she'd enlisted to serve her country with honor, but it was the work that needed doing, and they were the people willing to do it. 6 months after Ashford's conviction, new protocols were implemented throughout the military for reporting and investigating war crimes. Witness protection programs were established with real resources and genuine commitment to safety, rather than the token efforts that had existed before. Officers were required to undergo annual training on civilian casualty documentation and accountability for false reporting. Anonymous reporting channels were created, protected by regulations that made retaliation a criminal offense. The changes came too late for the 15 civilians in Kandahar, too late for the 14 other witnesses Ashford had silenced over the years, too late for countless other victims of cover-ups that had never been exposed and never would be. But they might save future lives, might protect future witnesses, might create a culture where telling the truth about war crimes was rewarded rather than punished with death or destruction of career. Maya Rodriguez's name appeared in military training materials as an example of courage under impossible circumstances. Her story, carefully edited to remove the most traumatic details, was taught to new recruits as a lesson in integrity and moral courage. She never sought the recognition, never wanted to be held up as an example or turned into a symbol, but her survival and testimony had changed military culture in ways that would ripple forward for generations. Hayes found purpose in retirement that had eluded him during 31 years of active service. Working with Webb's network, he helped dozens of veterans navigate bureaucracy, fight for benefits they'd earned, expose wrongdoing without becoming victims themselves. His military connections and understanding of the system made him invaluable. His willingness to challenge authority when necessary made him effective. His reputation as someone who'd sacrificed everything for justice made him trusted. Together, Hayes, Rodriguez, and Webb built something that hadn't existed before, a network dedicated to protecting truth-tellers within the military system. A place where witnesses could come without fear of retaliation. An organization that had resources to investigate, document, and expose crimes that official channels ignored or actively suppressed. They called it the Shepherd Protocol, named after the military tradition of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It operated in the shadows of the official system, funded by private donations from veterans who understood its importance. It saved lives, ended careers of corrupt officers, and slowly, incrementally changed the culture of silence that had protected war criminals for too long. The work was never finished. New cases arrived every week, new witnesses needed protection, new crimes needed investigation, new officers needed to be held accountable. But Hayes, Rodriguez, and Webb had learned something important through their experiences. Justice wasn't an event that happened once and was complete. Justice was an ongoing commitment, a daily choice to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. And they were committed for the long haul, for however many years they had left to serve in this new capacity. Sometimes justice takes 12 years. Sometimes it requires a colonel willing to destroy his career. Sometimes it needs a witness brave enough to come back from the dead. Sometimes it demands a network of people willing to operate outside official channels because those channels have failed too many times. But justice, when it finally comes, is worth every sacrifice, every risk, every loss, and the fight for justice never ends. It just finds new warriors willing to take up the cause. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who believes that truth always matters, even when it's dangerous to tell it. Subscribe to Hidden Valor Stories for more tales of veterans who fought for justice against impossible odds. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive, and remember, some debts can never be repaid, but they can always be honored. Some witnesses can never be silenced, no matter how powerful their enemies, and some truths once spoken in front of the right people can never be buried again.